Hey everyone, hope your day's going well. We are back with another reaction. Today, we're going to find out how the Beatles changed music. Well, I say we, but you already know. You already know. And some of you might already know as well that I've been on this Beatles journey. I've reacted to the first 5 albums on Patreon. Well, I'm getting to the end. One more song to go on that album called Help, which is an incredible album and some iconic songs on it. I love the Beatles. I've become a huge fan, and I've watched the Get Back documentary and some mini docs and some interviews, but sometimes without reaction, just on my own. And I'm trying to learn a little bit more about their history. And I know there's many documentaries out there on the streaming platforms. This one was suggested to me. There's another one on YouTube that I also want to check out. That one is quite a bit longer, so I need to find some time to check that out. We're going to start with this one. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Let's go. It starts in Liverpool, right? All right, let's go.
Liverpool, Merseyside, England, July 6th, 1957. 16-year-old John Lennon meets 15-year-old Paul McCartney at a church garden party. Lennon's band, The Quarrymen, had just played a set, and Paul had been impressed enough to come up to chat with him. As it turns out, McCartney was a musician too, and performed a song for Lennon backstage. Lennon was also impressed and asked McCartney to join the group as a rhythm guitarist. McCartney said yes. The two quickly got along due to their shared love for American rock and roll. In February 1958, McCartney invited his buddy George Harrison to watch the band. Harrison...
look at young George. What a handsome bloke. Oh, I love that origin story, which I have, there was a tidbit in Get Back documentary about the Quarrymen, and just a little bit of, a prologue to Get Back when they get into the studio, right, to create that album. There's a little bit before that, you can see, I love that, man. Just, coming together under the banner of your love of music. And in this case, American music, some blues and rock and all of that. And yeah, man, it's also, I love learning about this. 16, man. It's crazy how young they were when they started and how much great music they created before they were 30 years old.
Loved what he saw and also wanted in. After impressing the band with his amazing guitar skills, they enlisted him as lead guitarist. By January 1959, Lennon's buddies who had formed the original band were out of the picture, and it was just him, Paul, and George. They continued to perform, though, sometimes performing as Johnny and the Moondogs. Whenever they could find a random drummer, they would play a show. Meanwhile, Lennon had begun studying at Liverpool College of Art, and there he met a dude named Stuart Sutcliffe. They became friends, and Sutcliffe joined the band on bass. He was actually the one who convinced the band to change their name to Beatles. Yes, spelled that way. Later, they were the Silver Beatles, then the Silver Beatles, and then finally just the Beatles by August of 1960. It was around this time that they got a residency in the famous red light district of Hamburg, West Germany. They also got a drummer named Pete Best. For the next 3.5 months, the now 5-piece...
Is that what's the nickname? The Beatle who never was? Or, I know his name. His name is quite well known. Oh man. But I need to find out more. It's just the nuances of that entire story. Pete Best,
band played lots of shows in Hamburg. Even though they were all back in Liverpool in early 1961, they'd be back to Hamburg several times over the next couple years. Around that time, Sutcliffe left the band to go back to school and pursue painting, and McCartney took over bass. Tragically, Sutcliffe would die from a brain hemorrhage the next year. Throughout 1961, the Beatles began to build up a following with the growing Mercy Beat movement. A producer named Bert Kaempfert hired the Beatles, now a 4-piece, to tour as Tony Sheridan's backing band for some recordings for Polydor Records. In November, a local record store owner and music journalist named Brian Epstein first saw them perform and was extremely impressed. By January 1962, he was their manager and was trying to get them out of their contract with Bert Kaempfert. By May, they were free of that contract, and Epstein had already been arranging auditions for the Beatles with new record labels. Epstein and the Beatles Beatles were rejected by Columbia Records, HMV,
Oh.
High Records, Philips Records,
Columbia,
Oriole
what are you
Records,
doing?
and others. The band auditioned for Decca Records, who famously rejected them by telling Epstein that, quote, guitar groups are on the way out, and, quote, the Beatles have no future in show business. However,
somebody
producer
suits,
George
man.
Martin thought
Oh.
otherwise. He signed
Legend.
the band to
Not the
EMI's
writer.
Parlophone label. As the band began a recording session at EMI's Abbey Road Studios in June 1962, Martin complained about Best's drumming, saying it wasn't the best. I mean, he was best, but
Oh.
apparently not the best to Martin.
Okay.
Okay, that was bad. Sorry. Ultimately,
I love that. So okay, so it's George Martin who really put the idea out there. Oh, we gotta have to change this guy. Oh man, I honestly don't know. This is going pretty fast. Of course, there's many more nuances to all of this, but the entire history of the Beatles is so long and it's so complex. But the pace it's going at, just if you look at 1963, 2 albums in that year alone, and that rise is can't imagine your life changed so fast.
the
so
Beatles
fast.
had politely fired him from the band in August, replacing him
Right.
with a dude named Richie Starkey, aka his stage name, Ringo Starr, who had previously played drums for Rory Storm and the Hurricanes.
Oh.
The band recorded a few songs in September, and of those, Martin chose the song Love Me Do to be their first single, releasing it on October 5th, 1962. McCartney had actually originally written that song when he was 16, so yeah, the Beatles'
Wow.
first single was written before the Beatles even existed. Love Me Do was a success, peaking at number 17 on the record retailer chart. The band made their first television appearance on the regional news show People and Places. By the end of 1962, Epstein had convinced the band to stop swearing and smoking on stage. Oh, and to dress more professionally on stage. The band had also convinced each other that they'd be better if everyone helped out with not only the singing, but also the songwriting, although it'd mostly just be Lennon and McCartney doing most of the songwriting over the years. Parlophone
That's the usual partnership, which I have been learning a little bit more about, and who takes the lead and the vocals usually is the one who contributed most in terms of writing to that song. It's not always the case, but you know, I try to look that up. I've seen that Paul stated in his biography that sometimes it's 60-40, but man, they really are like the yin and yang of songwriting. It's amazing what they've created, and I'm only on album number 5, man. Oh God, I'm looking forward
helped
to
out
the
with
rest.
not only the singing, but also the
Love
songwriting.
these picks,
although
man. I
it'd
love
mostly
these
just
picks.
be Lennon and McCartney doing most of the songwriting over the years. Parlophone released their second single, Please Please Me, on January 11th, 1963. This one was a bigger hit, reaching number
I like
1
that
on
one.
both the New Musical Express and Melody Maker charts. On February 11th, the Beatles recorded 10 songs in one day for their debut LP, also
That was a
called
one
Please
day
Please Me, because
recording?
it featured the hit single. Wait,
Let's go.
did he say 10 songs in one day? Yes, I said 10 songs in one day. They
Sheesh.
recorded them live and knew the songs well. George Martin was still in shock, saying, quote, I don't know how they do it. We've been recording all day, but the longer we go on, the better they get. Parlophone released the album on March 22nd, 1963. By May, Please Please Me had hit the top of the United Kingdom album charts and stayed there for 30 weeks before being replaced by their next album. Yep. This is when
That's how you do
Beatlemania
it.
began.
That's how you
Beatlemania
do it.
describes the insane
Oh, wow.
popularity the Beatles experienced over the next
It
few
is.
years, typically
it's
symbolized by
scary.
screaming teenage girls chasing them around. The bigger they got, the
Man, I
greater
used to have dreams of that, but it never happened. This to them, it actually happened. I don't know. I don't know if it was a dream or a nightmare. So the jury's still out on that. Yeah, man, that was loud.
crazier the hysteria and high-pitched screaming by their mostly young fans. Please Please Me had 2 more huge hits, From Me to You and She Loves You. Beatlemania went next level with their second album, With the Beatles,
Yeah.
which Parlophone released on November 22nd, 1963.
The same
It
year,
eventually
man.
became just the second album in the United Kingdom to sell 1 million copies and stayed at the top of the album charts for 21 weeks. Though the album had no singles singles, it was even more critically acclaimed than their debut album, and also featured Harrison's first recorded solo composition. Oh yeah, and this was the album that described them as the, quote, fabulous foursome in the liner notes, and thus the Fab Four nickname was born. While the Beatles were huge in Europe, that success didn't quite translate to the United States, but that changed with their single, I Want to Hold Your Hand, which Capitol Records released in the United States the day after Christmas of 1963. The song was the band's first American #1 hit. In January, VJ released Introducing the Beatles, and Capitol released both Meet the Beatles and Twist and Shout in North America. These three albums had stuff from the Beatles' first two albums, but also some other gems. And then on February 9th, 1964, one of the most famous television performances in history. The Beatles made their American television debut on The Ed Sullivan Show to a screaming, wild crowd. Around 73 million people, or around 45% of all American television viewers, saw the live performance. It was clear that Beatlemania had crossed the Atlantic Ocean, and soon other British bands, like the Rolling Stones, the Kinks, and the Zombies, would as well, in what became known as the British Invasion. One thing I should probably mention.
Oh, they're coming over here taking our musical jobs. Yeah, love this. Hey, somebody has to pave the way, and that's amazing. That's more than 70 million people watching that performance. Yeah, that's insane. I remember I just reacted to another video of Paul, when he was describing the pictures that he recently found, and they developed it. And I think right before he went on, they said so many million. What? Sometimes you don't need to know that information. They still, they killed it.
Before we go on, most young Americans didn't have haircuts like this in early 1964. This hairstyle ended up becoming a subtle symbol of rebellion for a growing youth culture. Capitol suddenly realized they had a sensation on their hands, and in the spring, hurried to throw together another release to make some money. The Beatles' second album, even though it was not technically their second album, and in fact their third album released in the United States. The label also quickly released the Beatles' Long Tall Sally exclusively in Canada. All of these thrown together albums were hugely successful. By April, the Beatles...
It gets confusing when you try to find out. I'm trying to do everything chronologically. There's so many releases in different parts of the world. I try to stick to the UK editions or releases. It gets confusing. That's a cool tidbit about the haircuts there. So it's kind of a rebellion if you come home with that type of haircut. Because there's a new revolution in music going on. Usually the previous generation say, what is this? Pump and fist, right? Same thing happens with this isn't music, this is music, they say. And then later, the same young people that discovered the Beatles and were proponents of new music, then might say similar things about the stuff from today, or rap or hip hop. It's like, we become that. Come on, you gotta be honest. I'm doing it too, by the way. Hey, I'm not above that, but just pointing that out.
Long Tall Sally exclusively in Canada. All of these thrown together albums were hugely successful. By April, the Beatles had 14, that's right, 14 songs on Billboard's Hot 100 singles charts all at once. Around that time, United Artists Records gave the Beatles a deal to make 3 movies. Yep, now the Beatles were actors. The first movie was a musical comedy based off what they were really experiencing, called A Hard Day's Night, and was a smash hit, of course. The soundtrack for the film was officially their third studio album, released on July 10th, 1964. The soundtrack had 4 singles: the title track, I'll Cry Instead, And I Love Her, and even the instrumental version of And I Love Her. And then Capitol Records was like, hey, we need some more money. We haven't released a Beatles album for a couple months, and threw some more songs together to release Something New on July 20th, 1964. The band toured heavily that summer, playing 37 shows over 27 days around the world. In August, the Beatles began a big tour of North America. It was on that tour that they got to meet Bob Dylan, and he introduced them to his friend Cannabis. Dylan ended up having a big influence on the band's later music. Also on that tour, the band found themselves confronting racial segregation in the American South. They threatened to not play a show in Jacksonville, Florida, after hearing the audience would be segregated, and due to this, city officials gave in and agreed to allow an integrated audience. On December 4th, Parlophone released Beatles for Sale, their fourth studio album. As the name of the album suggests, it kind of showed the rising conflict between the pressure to keep selling records and keep up their creativity. It actually featured songs not about love on it, and even offered a bit of cynicism. Still, it instantly hit #1 on the UK albums chart. Capitol released Beatles 65 a couple weeks later, which featured most of the songs off Beatles for Sale. In April 1965, John Lennon and his wife Cynthia and George Harrison and his girlfriend Patty Boyd were hanging out with George's dentist, John Riley. Riley apparently secretly added LSD to their coffee. Boy, was that a surprise trip for the bunch. Regardless, after this, Lennon and Harrison would be regular users of the drug. And later, Starr and McCartney also tried it with them. You'll notice that 1965 marks a more dramatic beginning of a shift in their music, although they never would abandon making just flat-out darn catchy songs. On June 14th of that year, Capitol Records released another compilation to continue cashing in North America called Beatles 6, even though it was their 7th Beatles release. That same month, Queen Elizabeth sparked controversy by appointing all 4 Beatles members of the Order of the British Empire. Later that summer, the band starred in their second film, Help. The soundtrack to that film would be their 5th studio album, released on August 6, 1965. Although the whole album is a classic that got tons of perfect reviews, the 3 biggest hits off of it were the title track, Ticket to Ride, and Yesterday. According to the Guinness Book of...
good. Help and Yesterday, man. This been stuck in my head. And Act Naturally, yeah. The Ticket to Ride is really good too.
World Records, Yesterday remains the most covered song in history. The movie was another comedy that followed the group as they struggled to record a new album, all while logically protecting Ringo from a cult and a pair of mad scientists. The band toured regularly promoting the album, playing one of their most famous shows on August 15th at New York's Shea Stadium to a record crowd of 55,600 people. In September, ABC began airing a Saturday morning cartoon about the band. It was the first weekly show to feature animated versions of real living people. In October, George Martin and the band decided that instead of just making albums that were really just a collection of singles, they were going to focus on making a complete album. Also, for the first time in their entire careers, they were able to take their time recording, free of tour, radio, or film commitments. The result was a masterpiece, Rubber Soul, their 6th studio album released on December 3rd, 1965. Critics praised the album, of course, saying it marked a new threshold of complexity and maturity of the band's sound. Later, Lennon joked this was, quote, the pot album, as apparently the band was regularly smoking pot while recording it. Many fans say this explains the dramatic change of direction of Rubber Soul, an album that was folkier, featured new instruments, brighter guitar tones, and complex arrangements. Some of the bigger hits on the album included We Can Work It Out, Norwegian Wood, Nowhere Man, and Michelle. In March 1966, the Evening Standard, a London-based newspaper, published an interview with John Lennon. Lennon would later cause quite a bit of controversy when he said, quote, "We're more popular than Jesus now. I don't know which will go first, rock and roll or Christianity." Well, those words would haunt the band throughout the rest of the year. Lennon implying the Beatles were more popular than Jesus, even though the comment was taken out of context, led to protests, death threats, and the public burning of the band's albums. To add to their controversy, on June 20th, Capitol released another compilation album called Yesterday and Today with this controversial cover. Despite this, hundreds of thousands of screaming fans continue to come to their shows. In fact, those screaming fans were so loud that the band had a hard time hearing themselves playing. This, combined with the fact that they'd become a bit bored with the routine of performing live, and that these live shows shows were no longer about the music anyway, influenced them to decide to make their tour for their upcoming album, Revolver, their last tour ever. Revolver released...
Hey, man, you can't hear yourself so loud. That was also mentioned in the beginning of the Get Back documentary, right? That they weren't doing that, and then that performance on the rooftop, it was so long ago, right? That's almost unimaginable. Like, I can't even hear myself playing because of all this screaming.
For their upcoming album, Revolver, their last tour ever. Revolver, released on August 5th, 1966, and the band's 7th studio album, continued the experimental trend that Rubber Soul started. It was another masterpiece, featuring a dive into psychedelic rock, and again featuring complex arrangements that pushed popular music forward in a completely new direction. Basically, the Beatles were at the top of their game, and everyone else was playing catch-up. Many music critics have said it is literally the greatest album of all time. The cover of Revolver was even radically different. Two of the bigger hits on the album were Eleanor Rigby and Paperback Writer, which even had a music video made for it.
Oh, I thought Paperback Writer wasn't released on an album. I don't know, man. I'm trying like these singles that didn't make it on studio albums, but this did? No, I'm confused. Was this also a UK release? I don't know, man. I'm gonna have to do my due diligence. I thought Paperback Writer wasn't on it.
Eleanor Rigby and Paperback Writer, which even had a music video made for it. It was one of the earliest music videos. The Beatles played their last concert before a paying audience at San Francisco's Candlestick Park on August 29th, 1966. After 4 years of non-stop touring and more than 1,400 concerts, they were now a studio band. They went back to Abbey Road Studios in November, and this time took their own sweet time recording, wanting to make their most experimental and well-produced record yet. And take their time they did, spending over 700 hours in the studio, 55 hours of that on just one song, Strawberry Fields Forever. However, that song didn't make the cut for what would become their 8th studio album, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, released on May 26, 1967. To say this was another masterpiece is almost an understatement. Remember how
That's, of course, a name that I know and am aware of. So I'm very much looking forward to, in my chronological journey, to get to these albums that we just seen, man. Oh.
To say this was another masterpiece is almost an understatement. Remember how I said that many music critics said Revolver is the greatest album of all time? Well, many music critics also have said Sgt. Pepper's is the greatest album of all time. The album's cover is certainly among the most famous of all time. It was the first album to print the lyrics of every song in the artwork. It might have single-handedly both started progressive rock and the entire 1960s counterculture movement. It made the concept album popular. Simply put, it literally changed pop music forever. Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band remains the United Kingdom's best-selling studio album. On June 25th, 1967, the Beatles performed a new single, All You Need Is Love, to just 350 million people via the first ever live global television link. That song ended up becoming a flower power anthem, by the way, sung by hippies at Vietnam War protests around the world. Tragically, on August 27th, the band received news that their manager, Brian Epstein, had died of a drug overdose at the young age of 32. This devastated the band and seriously made their future uncertain. In fact, they were so lost after Epstein's death that they made a crappy movie where they filmed themselves touring the country in a psychedelic...
Just that intro riff is so good, man. I love that song.
That they made a crappy movie where they filmed themselves touring the country in a psychedelic bus with a random cast of strange characters. Well, that film, called Magical Mystery Tour, was the first project the Beatles ever did that critics completely trashed, calling it, quote, blatant rubbish and a, quote, witless home movie. However, the soundtrack to the film of the same name, released on November 27th, 1967, was praised by critics and another commercial success. Meanwhile, the band had been spending more and more time following the guru Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. In February 1968, they even traveled to Rishikesh, India, to hang out with him and attend his seminars on transcendental meditation. Starr and McCartney didn't stay there as long as Lennon and Harrison, though, and this ultimately caused some tension in the band. In the spring, Lennon came back to London and began to heavily use more damaging drugs like heroin and left his wife Cynthia for his new infatuation, a young artist named Yoko Ono. For the next 2 years, Yoko Ono was always by his side, to a point where it even further added tension to the band. Still,
I wasn't too much aware of the history before I watched like Get Back, but then you see, that she's always there in the studio and showing up and always, never leaving his side. It's kind of like, whoa, this really feels like a little bit like codependency. So yeah, but hey, man, if he wanted it around, if he didn't want it around, then he would have said something, I guess. But for the other people, it may be uh, difficult. If you're in a creative environment, you try to connect with your band members. It could be hard if somebody's always around. But they did make it work there.
His side, to a point where it even further added tension to the band. Still, on May 14th, 1968, Lennon and McCartney appeared on The Tonight Show to announce their new multimedia company called Apple Corps. Get it? Like Apple Corps? They launched the conglomerate to help new artists, but ultimately its record label, Apple Records, would be just a creative outlet for the Beatles. On July 17th, a somewhat trippy animated film featuring the band called Yellow Submarine premiered at theaters in London. In October, the band finished up recording a huge batch of new songs, so huge that they would make up a double album. Their only double album, in fact, simply called The Beatles. Right? Their ninth studio album would eventually just be known as the White Album because, well, look at it. It had no
graphic. I thought that was actually the title. So the title is just The Beatles, and that's the nickname then, the White Album. Oh, okay.
Or text other than the band's name. They released it on their own label on November 22nd, 1968. The recording process was again long and drawn out, and the members of the band increasingly found themselves getting annoyed with each other, even showing up on different days to record different parts. In fact, just 16 of the album's 30 songs have all 4 band members performing, even though there were no official singles off the album. 2 of the bigger hits on it included Obla Di, Obla Da, and While My Guitar Gently Weeps. It was another masterpiece, praised by most critics, by the way. Oh, and of course, eventually sold millions. Not until January 13th, 1969, did they release the soundtrack to the movie released the previous year, Yellow Submarine. It was their 10th studio album, and only got mixed reviews, mostly because the Beatles kind of just threw some leftover songs on it. On Billboard's album chart, the Yellow Submarine soundtrack reached number 2, just behind the White Album, which held at the number 1 position. Around that time, McCartney really wanted the Beatles to start playing live again, believing all this studio work was hurting the band's chemistry. The rest of the band kind of agreed and went along with the idea of touring again. However, rehearsals often did not go well. Sure, Yoko Ono famously got a lot of the blame for distracting Lennon, but all 4 of the Beatles were distracted. January 1969 was actually a busy month for the band. In addition to rehearsals, they started recording some songs how they used to in the early years. On January 30th, 1969, the band, along with soul musician Billy Preston, played a surprise concert right on top.
I love that, man. It's, hey, Billy, just come on over. Help us with a few songs. He said, all right, let's go. That's a cool dude. That's a good dude. He just stayed there, right? Now that's a solid guy right there. Let's go. And I love that, just that fly on the wall thing. You watch him create from scratch, start over, get back, just, oh, God.
Top of the Apple headquarters in London. The 42-minute set would be the last public performance by the Beatles. Yep, they soon abandoned the idea of touring again. In late February, they decided to record a new batch of songs the way they recorded the White Album. Recording sessions would occur sporadically over the next few months. Preston often joined them, becoming another 5th Beatle. As the months went on, it was clear that the band was drifting further and further apart. The last time that all 4 members worked together under the same roof was recording their song The End on August 18th, 1969. The End? Huh, yeah, that fits. By the end of 1969, each member already had their own solo projects going in full swing. Lennon was the first to officially leave the band, privately telling them on September 20th. But the general public didn't know this. 6 days later, the band released their 11th studio album, Abbey Road, which had this legendary cover
Iconic.
where they are crossing, Abbey Road, taken just outside Abbey Road Studios. The album was another huge success, but got mixed reviews from critics. George Harrison finally got some praise for this one with the 2 hits he wrote, Something and Here Comes the Sun. Within 3 months, Abbey Road had sold 4 million copies, but by that time, the remaining 3 members barely saw each other. They did have a bunch of recordings from before the Abbey Road sessions they wanted to release, though. They recorded one last song together in January called I, Me, Mine. The legendary producer Phil Spector came in to help that spring put a new album together. It would be their last. On April 10th, 1970, the Beatles formally announced their breakup. A month later, they released their 12th and final studio album, Let It Be. They also released a documentary of the same name a few days later. That film followed them around during their struggles in the final months of the band, with a highlight being footage of their famous rooftop concert from the previous January. Let It Be was a commercial success with the hit ballads The Long and Winding Road and the title track. But this one definitely got some more negative reviews. News of the breakup of the Beatles devastated fans around the world. But fortunately for them, all 4 of them have thriving careers as solo artists and with other bands. All of them had hits at some point or another, but the releases of the Beatles would always overshadow their work. An insane fan murdered John Lennon outside of his apartment building on December 8th, 1980. George Harrison died from lung cancer on November 29th, 2001. Paul McCartney died in 1966. Just kidding.
That's the conspiracy,
He's still kicking
man.
it. In fact, both he and Ringo Starr are still performing and releasing music, and recently reunited to record a song that John Lennon wrote the last year of his life and played a couple songs live together last summer in Los Angeles. Though there were many Beatles compilations and films released in the decades since the band broke up, a couple big ones of note were the Beatles Anthology and One. The Beatles Anthology was a television documentary set of double albums and a book that examined the history of the band in way more depth than this video has. Oh,
that's
and
a nice
McCartney,
collectible
Harrison,
right there.
and Starr were involved with the whole process. One was a compilation of all the band's #1 singles. It came out November 13th, 2000, and ended up being the best-selling album of the decade, eventually selling more than 31 million copies.
Still killing it.
Just wanted to get guitars, get in a band, because we didn't really have proper jobs at the time.
Hey. No plan
Anyway,
B, man. Let's go.
It
worked
sort of
out.
turned out fine, and it's got a bit bigger than any of us expected.
So, of course, the Beatles were inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of
could
Fame,
expect this?
but also all 4 individual members have been inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Today, the Beatles
As they should
are
be.
widely considered to be the most influential band of all time. They defined an entire generation and transformed popular music forever. Former Rolling Stone editor Robert Greenfield wrote, quote, "In the form of popular music, no one will ever be more revolutionary, more creative, and more distinctive. The band even changed how people listen to music." What's particularly impressive about the Beatles is that they were both critically acclaimed and extremely popular. Critics universally adore them, and they also just happen to be the best-selling musicians in the history of the world, selling more than 800 million albums worldwide. Probably no other musicians will ever accomplish what they accomplished. They are simply the greatest band of all time.
Dead, really.
Don't believe me? Go ahead and Google greatest band of all time and see what comes up.
Get back. Let's go.
So, who was the true 5th Beatle? Who is your favorite Beatle? What did I leave
question.
out? Obviously, I
Billy
can't
Preston
include
has,
everything in these videos,
is
so
in a
I do
conversation.
appreciate the additional information. Also, look for more of these in 2020, and I've decided I'm going to commit to release at least 1 video a month on this channel. Thanks for watching.
Hey, link to this video is in the description, and check out that channel. Really, I love this, how it was made, and you get to kind of TLDR on the Beatles because there's so much history there, and I really enjoyed this. And yeah, man, it's amazing what they've done and still continue to do. Like you talked about, change the way people listen to music, and for me, starting a reaction channel has done that. But really, listening to the Beatles, that really has changed it too for me, and yeah, become a fan. It's they continue to create fans in different generations, so that's a worthy legacy. That's commendable, man. That's remarkable, beautiful, awesome. Loved this video. Thank you for recommending it, for spending some time with me. Hope you have a great day. See you in the next one. Peace.